welcome to our Insurtech breakfast. My name is Gabriela Trujillo, and I am the Marketing and Communications Manager at HITS, House of Insurtech Switzerland. It's an absolute delight to see a lot of familiar faces actually joining us this morning, and also new names that I don't recognize, but thank you so much for joining us. So today, as we stand at the height of the new era of artificial intelligence, the EU AI Act emerges. So this is guiding us through the landscape of AI innovation and its implications. So it's vital time for startups and innovators, especially for those who are navigating in this complex wave of Gen AI and related technologies. So we are very fortunate actually to have with us our guest speaker, Syang. He's the esteemed CTO and co-founder of Calvin Risk, and he will share his expertise with us this morning. So before we jump into this session, let me just remind you that this Insurtech breakfast is being recorded. We, of course, encourage you to turn on your cameras for better interaction. But if you do not wish to appear in the video recording, and make your debut on social media later on, just please turn your cameras off and enjoy the session. Also, at the end, we have prepared a space for Q&A. So if you have any questions, just feel free to write them on the chat and I will read them out loud later on. All right, so let's just kick this Insurtech breakfast off the ground. Grab your coffee or tea, whatever you like. And here's to morning of inspiration and learnings. So again, welcome everybody to HIT Insurtech Breakfast. Syang, the stage is yours.
Thanks a lot, Gabriela. Very nice to meet you and good morning everyone to this breakfast. Thanks a lot for joining this early. My name is Syang. I'm from Germany, but I've been living in Switzerland now for the last 12 years. My background is in financial mathematics, and afterwards I also worked a couple of years at PwC Switzerland. Actually, I also had a project at Generali at some time, so I was in this artist building. And now since 2022, together with my co-founder Julian, we founded the company Calvin Risk. And our motto is that we want to enable the use of artificial intelligence through risk management tools. And today I would like to talk about Gen AI and also the implications of Gen AI into the insurance industry. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. Okay, so today I will talk about 5 main topics. First, I will start with talking a bit about generative AI in general, and then about the EU AI Act, just a very brief overview of what is there. And I mean, as you might know, last week, it passed through the European Parliament, even though the final text is not quite out yet. There has been some leaks, but really the official final version is not out yet. But it's there should be a lot known about it already. Afterwards, I will talk about validation in practice, and then also validation of Gen AI in specifically, and then lastly about some Gen AI governance principles. So first, the state of AI in insurance currently. There's more and more AI use. The use of AI in insurance, of course, is not new at all. It has been used for decades now, but just the methods are getting more and more sophisticated. And also there's more and more opening up of new possibilities. For insurers, there's a lot to gain by using and leveraging AI very efficiently. One of them, of course, is operational efficiency. Then also through product superiority, like insurances will be able to launch new insurance products based on AI, which are currently not feasible. And then also being a leader in the tech race. There's, for example, a 3.6 billion market in the AI insurance of 2022. So insurance can also leverage in this sense by not only using AI, but also maybe moving into insuring AI. This will be a whole new insurance space opening up currently. For example, Allianz Germany actually has a product already. It's sort of a prototype product at the moment. It's called AI Insure, or something like this. But basically what they do is they have a team of very experienced AI engineers, and together with them and claims management, they really ensure the use of AI for other companies, and thereby doing the risk transfer, that which is of course the main business of insurances. What is new today? Now, like with Gen AI coming up, there's just new use cases that can be done, which were like potentially infeasible even a couple of years ago. There's lots of things that can be done. One of them is, of course, using these large language models that are currently emerging to sift through extensive data, such as past claims. So now it's really possible to have like a RAG system where you can feed it with lots of internal document and ask questions about it, and thereby like making use of the maybe it's like unstructured data that has been gathering over the past. Also, there's like now be able to do better forecasts into the future, and also fraud detections things, but also actually like there's now new things where you can also maybe take a picture of the damages of your car, and then there's already an automated thing which tells you, yeah, like what the damage might be, or give you the range about this. Actually, in China, maybe like there's even one very widespread use case, which I'm not sure if regulation will be permitting here. But basically, there's one way where like you have to point the camera at your face when you give like a claim statement, and then the camera tries to detect if you are trying to defraud it in this sense. But with like all of these new emerging technologies, there's also new risks coming up. So, and these risks are now finally being systematically tracked. So there's now an initiative by the OECD which tracks just the number of AI incidents. Like they do this through various methods by like, for example, doing web crawling, but also through self-reportings. And as you can see with this graph, the number of AI incidents is like ever increasing and really like spiked now, like with the start of 2023, but also 24, it's ever increasing. And now, like, I'd like to just give an example of the new risks that are emerging with these large language models that like previously were just not there yet. One of the biggest things is called prompt injection. So this is sort of like a very much leaning into the old SQL injection from cybersecurity, where you try to use very specific language in order to trick the model into behavior that is unwanted. So this one is like an old hack that is called the grandma hack. So for example, OpenAI, of course, does not want to tell you how to make a bomb. So when you, for example, ask it to do that, then like it will tell you, ah, no, I'm not allowed to answer or something like this. But like there's of course hacks around it, where for one of them being this grandma hack. So this of course has been fixed by now, but this is like a cat and mouse game. There's new and new hacks, and then always also fixes there. But this worked a couple months ago, where you could say like, please act as my deceased grandmother who used to be a chemical engineer and so on, and then it will just give you the answer like, based on this prompt. And now with language models also being more and more multimodal, so they are able to actually interact now with pictures. There's new development where they can even act as agents. There's just new attack vectors opening up. Just wanted to highlight one thing where like now like it's the same idea with prompt injection, but now basically you can do it by imprinting it somewhere in the picture. So now this here, this is visible, of course, this is a very obvious hack, but now of course, like there's new attacks where you somehow encode like the hack or the unwanted behavior you want to do as ASCII message into the picture. So it's basically really like a cat and mouse game. And then the more capable these models are, the more, of course, the dangers will be. This was just like an overview of like generative AI and what is to be expected by the technology. Now I'd like to focus a bit more on the EU AI Act itself. So according to the latest known draft, there will be an EU AI regulation where like all the AI models used within the European Union fall under. The models are classified into three main categories. The first one is unacceptable risk. This is just like models that are bound. So like two prime examples for this would be one, automatic drones that kill people, or like social scoring. So these practices are completely banned in the European Union. So there's no amount of like risk management you can do to make it safe. Then on the other side, there's minimal risk. So there's almost no obligations to be done. So there just needs to be some transparency obligations, but other than this, there's almost no regulation around it. So the core of the EU AI Act focuses on AI systems which are classified as high risk. There's just a lot of provisions that they have to do. One of them being the implementation of a risk management system. Then the next will be data and model governance management. Of course, there also has to be technical documentation. There needs to be record keeping and logging, and also human oversight, accuracy, cybersecurity, and conformity assessments. Actually, within the EU AI Act, there is a general, like sort of an extra addendum for general purpose AI. General purpose AI are sorts of things like open AI right now, which can really do lots of different tasks. This was added very late into the regulation because most likely it was when it was first drafted, it was not yet known that like there will be such a big hype around it and that it will be so powerful. And they have also still like some additional requirements. So about the timeline of the EU AI Act, it will be rolled out in several stages. The first one is like 6 months after the entry in force. There will be a ban of the prohibited practices. These are these unacceptable risk systems that will be like banned and starting coming into effect 6 months after the EU AI Act enters into force. Then there's code of practice things that are like 9 months after this. And then the main thing though is like 1 year after it is into force, the provisions around the general purpose AI will be enforceable, including governance rules. And then the last thing that comes into effect is the obligations for the high-risk systems. So this will be like if we say that the EU AI will come into force later this year, this one will be around 25 and this one will be then 27. So regulating Gen AI in insurances also like it's very interesting in the sense that of course there's a lot of overlap with existing rules with for example solvency. So there's general requirements of course which are applicable to high risk models which most of them like insurances currently already have to do anyway. So having, for example, effective data governance, logging of documentation. So a lot of the things are actually things that are not new, but maybe just have to be seen in a slightly broader context. And then there's also requirements for deployers and importers. So they are a bit different in the sense that like they have to actively conduct assessments. So like, for example, assessments on the fundamental rights of impact assessment and data protection laws. Also, they have to, of course, ensure that there's a reasonable incident management and also reporting. Like one of the provisions is that incidents which are severe have to be reported to a European agency such that they can be like monitored on a more broader scale. And then lastly, there's general purpose AI requirements, which are, like, as I mentioned, it's a bit additional on top of the requirements, just purely for these very powerful general purpose models. There, they also have to ensure model evaluations, of course, but also things about they have to have adversarial testing in order to at least limit this the danger of these sorts of for example, the prompt injection attacks I talked about earlier. So how can you actually validate that these practices are fulfilled? So there's currently a big barriers into scaling AI initiatives. So this one was a survey conducted by Deloitte, which says that 50% of people say that the management of AI risk is one of the top barriers to scaling AI initiatives. And then also it's not clear at all like where exactly it should be used. So in a sense now like you have a very powerful tool, but it's difficult to identify like really concretely which use cases are the most valuable for the business. And then also the proof of business value is not very easy because these initiatives are still very expensive and it's very hard to track like on the profit and loss side if it's actually worth it to do. And if you look into validation in practice, there is lots of different ways where you can try to validate AI systems. It all starts with just model-based AI software testing. So of course, the models have to be traceable, testable, and also you have to be able to run it on TED training and test data. And then there is classification-based software training. So like you give it different context, outputs, see how it performs under different environments. And then there's also learning-based testing. So this is sort of like with giving human feedback. You see like monitor its use in the field and see how it works, and then also like conduct feedback from experts. And then also there is testing where like actually you don't have a ground truth. This is there's several methods there. One of them being actually you can ask some of these very high capability systems to reflect themselves. And then you can do consistency checks, for example, to see if they always give the similar answer in similar environments. And then lastly, that you can enact governance rules around it. So basically, you limit the space of the scope of what the system should answer, and then see if it goes outside the scope, then like you flag it as an error. So as a starting point for the governance, there's of course the need to check the performance of the model. I mean, this is of course the main essential thing because I mean, if the model itself is not performant, there's not really business value in using it. And then there's the quality and risk management aspect and also like the mitigation around it. So one should have good mitigation framework and also one should have fallback methods in order if something goes wrong. One of the most important thing here is to choose the right tests and metrics suited for the AI system and to perform quality and economic assessments. I would like to just highlight that economic assessments are very important here because models don't really have inherent risk. It's really all based on how you actually use it in the business context. Now I'd like to go into generative AI. Basically this was a very nice overview done by Boston City actually, and which kind of highlights what are the existing risks of current AI models, and then what are augmented risks in two dimensions. One of them, they identify a scale of use. That means like with new AI, maybe it's used further and in more areas. And so like how that's like what are new risks that emerge by doing this. And then also breadth of use, which means that now like there's new use cases opening up. So like what are the dangers there? And then there's the last category, which is completely new risks, which are just because of the new technology and what are the risks which did not occur before. One of the prime examples here are of course hallucinations. I'm sure you all heard of this by now, but it's just like these generative AI models tend to be able to hallucinate in a very self-assured way. So basically, they say something in a tone that makes it sound very believable, but actually, oftentimes it is completely wrong. And of course, one of the breadth of use new things are that these adversarial attacks that I talked about, prompt injection, but also other aspects such as biases. It's also very difficult to check like if in particular large language models are biased because it's of course language based. So you would have to do a very extensive testing in order to uncover any unknown biases. So how does one actually validate Gen AI models? This is a very open research field for now, but there's already a couple of things that one knows that one should do. So first of all, one should have realistic and standardized benchmarks. So you should always like kind of see, go from this more like from the output wise, like what kind of outputs do you expect? And in this sense, see how you can go through this. It's very difficult to use just baseline approaches such as performance and things, because actually these models are just, in a sense, first of all, they evolve very often, and also there's very low reproducibility in their results. Lastly, I want to go into governance aspects of generative AI. I personally believe that this is actually the main lever that organizations can use in order to limit the risks of AI. So because so in general, there's two approaches. So one of them is like you try to put a lot of safeguards and things around it. So let's say you want to limit that your chatbot is not giving out privacy information. So one approach would be, of course, to have privacy filters there. There's a lot of companies conducting this already, or like to have safeguards around it to try to classify like when something is privacy violating. But that's just very difficult and also very error prone. So the best method is, of course, to just make it so that the model does not have the privacy information in the first place. So then like it has no way of doing privacy violations. And that's the whole idea about AI governance in this sense. So one should just limit really the scope into what the system can do, what information it gets, and also how the output is used. So also, of course, there's a couple of things that one can always do, which is just, first of all, to fact check anything that is generated by AI. This can be done both automatically, but also on a sample set by human reviewers. Then there's also disclosing. It's like in general, people don't really like to talk to a chatbot when they don't know that they are talking to a chatbot. Right? So there's already anyway disclosure requirements. If you're using chatbots that according to the EU AI Act, then you have to actually disclose that you're using. But it's also generally good practice to be transparent around it. And then lastly, of course, sensitive and private information. You should just limit what can be input into the prompt so that the information doesn't reach the chatbot in the first place, and so that there's no way of disclosing it. One example which was very well done is like to have a risk-based approach, where you first identify where do you use the Gen AI in your organization, and then you see what is the risk. So this one is an example which I believe is a very good governance structure that we've seen, where the organization first has on the one axis the risk of information breach, on the other axis the risk of adverse effect, and then they basically put the use cases in there, see like where it lies, and then have different specific governance rules depending on how risky they are. Thanks a lot. I would be very happy to discuss further if you want to reach me or like learn more about like how we as a company try to solve all of these issues that I just talked about. Please very much feel free to reach out.
All right, thank you so much. It's a lot. It's a lot of information. So, does anybody have any questions? We do have quite a bit of time for the Q&A, so it would be great. Okay, I see there's a question. Hold on. All right, so Sam is asking, in your experience and discussion with corporates, how is the perceived pain in complying to the EU AI Act today? For instance, when a corporate wants to launch a Gen AI project, how many months will it need to do all the checks before finally starting the AI projects? Thank you, Sam, for that.
Thank you, Sam. That's a very good question. So first, just want to highlight that currently the EU AI Act is not yet into effect. So as of right now, the corporates don't have to comply to any of the provisions. It's more like as an ongoing for the future. But having said this, learning from the experience from GDPR, companies are very much trying to already do pre-assessments right now in order to not like having to restructure all of their processes when this new regulation actually comes into effect. So because, for example, with the GDPR, companies noted that a lot of companies waited quite a long time because there also there was a long grace period, but then actually trying to be compliant to it was very expensive because just of all of the IT infrastructure changes which had to be performed. So companies are currently very much looking into already getting ahead of this, but as of right now, it's hard to say like how many months it will take because the regulation itself is not yet into effect.
Good, thank you. So James also asks, do you see competitive advantages for companies to adopt strong governance practice now?
Yes, I think there are very strong competitive advantages for companies to adopt their governance practices now due to many cases. One of them is that this will make your AI maturity already better now. So it's not only about regulatory compliance, but it will also just make the project a lot better and smoother if there's clear governance guidelines. And the other point is there has been a lot of studies. I can share a couple of sources after this call, which highlight that companies who were proactive with regulations such as GDPR have been a lot more successful in the long run than companies that were waiting until the last minute.
Okay, thank you. All right, does anybody else have a question? Okay. Donato's asking, if Generali, let's say, implements ChatGPT for every employee, how much can it be the risk of disclosing company information?
This depends a bit, like in your example, would every employee have access to this, or would it only be selected employees? Or do you mean like disclosing company information to OpenAI itself?
Yes. So maybe Donato, you can speak as well. You can ask the
Okay.
question yourself, so we don't have any misunderstanding of the question.
Okay, so
Yes, can. Do you hear me?
Yes, we
Hi.
hear you.
I was just interested in the use case of generative AI for the company. I mean, in case, let's say you use a ChatGPT for every employee, and there are some companies which they do so. They allow employees to have ChatGPT, for example, enterprise version, which is supposed to not disclose any information of the company. You said, but this is very error prone. So how much would you assess the risk that using such a solution would indeed be a risk for the company in disclosing company information? And then really the chat GPT access should be, of course, for every employee, not only selected one.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And indeed, as you mentioned, there is enterprise versions of OpenAI, which at least supposed to have servers which are not connected to the main one, and also which don't further post-process the information you provide. This is, of course, very much based on trust. I have no information here, like if OpenAI would violate this trust. But in general, one has to assume that every single prompt that you ask ChatGPT or like a large language model is part of the system afterwards, and also the information is basically out of your hand. if you really want to limit this, there's a couple of methods. There's one of them would be governance rules, as I said before, where maybe like you have prompt templates. This is what we saw that some companies do, where basically you're not completely free in what you ask the chatbot, but there is like just some sort of a system which determines like what information gets thrown out or like is not allowed to be shared with the GPT. But the other even more stable system, but which is might be very costly though, is to actually deploy one of the open source systems. There are currently already quite good ones, but of course this is very costly to do for a corporation.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, also Sam asks, what are the fines if not compliant?
The fines which are about with not compliant, they are, I think, in 3 stages. So the highest can be up to 7% of the global turnover. This is like basically when you use one of the prohibited systems, such as the killer drone and stuff. And then, but the other things are like typically in the range of 1 to 3% of global turnover if you violate some of the disclosure requirements or like you don't comply with risk management practices, for example.
Okay, so Remo asks, how can a software development company determine to which regulation risk category their product belongs? For example, we build a service with front end, which is using an external AI service in back end. That this AI service qualifies as high-risk system according to the AI Act. Does this mean that our services also qualifies as a high-risk system?
So in general, this how these systems are classified is not based on the model itself, but on how you use it. And there's a couple of guidelines within the AI Act about like how you can classify it. So for example, if it has direct impact to humans, it's usually classified as high risk. But to the question how a software company such as ourselves can determine the category, it's very difficult, and we actually partner with either lawyers or one of the biggest certification agencies in order to provide this service.
Very smart. All right. We have a bunch of questions in the chat, so please bear with us while we answer them all. So Graciela has another question. She asks, many companies, example, CKB and Zurich, tell in social media they are making accessible chat GPTs for employees. Pros and cons from your perspective.
I'm very glad that you asked also about the pros. So I think so. There is now the tendency to only talk about the risk perspective, but of course, companies would not use it if there is not huge benefits in using it. Using ChatGPT already has huge efficiency gains in ranging from all sorts of aspects, just like taking all of the repetitive work, and then also it's easier to, for example, companies such as ZKB and Zurich, they have a huge wealth of internal information, which is then very difficult for you to actually gain actionable knowledge from it. So having an internal chatbot there, which really helps you to navigate and learn from all of this information that is there, is extremely helpful. The cons are, of course, the risk that of data leakage, that's always there. And then also other requirements, things such that like you have to use it correctly in a sense. So like have to ensure that you should still double check the answers that the chatbot provides. As mentioned, there's potential for hallucinations and so on. But like I would say in general, the pros very much outweigh the cons if one has the right governance.
All right, thank you, Graciela, for asking. Also, Mark is asking where there's a stack, in quotes, of AI technology employed in a solution by virtue adopting modules of sub-tier suppliers in the system. How will the risk management obligations extend into the sub-tier? Sorry.
I'm not sure if I fully understand this question correctly, but like in this whole life cycle in general, there's just different players who have then different requirements. So there's the providers, they have, which would be, for example, the model providers, which might be, for example, OpenAI. They have different requirements than the end users, which also have some requirements. Also, the importers who actually then make this system accessible. So there's different requirements for everyone in the life cycle. And I'm not sure what it's exactly meant with sub-tier supplier, but in general, just like the EUAI is structured such that every participant in the whole life cycle has some requirements and some stake into the output.
I don't know, Mark, if you want to rephrase your question or if you want to ask another question regarding to that.
I think what was behind it was the fact that you have reliance on many players or modules that make up a system, and to what extent the risk management responsibility would extend into monitoring, controlling, validating that the sub-tier suppliers or the partners have actually performed risk management activities to the same degree. So where does the liability sit, or where are you projecting the liability would sit in that context?
Okay. The reliability is in how you actually use the system. So in the sense, like if you are comfortable with if you manage how you use the system and how it affects the public, you are not really liable into like the upstream things. But this is basically their liability. But like you cannot really just point your finger and say like, oh yeah, but I use this system and then this system produced this output, so I'm not liable. That doesn't work. So like you are liable for your own output, but not like about the risk management solutions from upstream providers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for asking. All right, so Matthias has a question. What is your perception of the EU AI Act with the development of Gen AI technologies and the development of AI startups? What startups should take into consideration specifically, especially when working now with corporates? Time to market increasing? Is there all the info corporate startups need? What is your feeling as a market expert? There were like 10 questions in these questions.
So let me generalize this a bit.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
My general perception is that there is definitely the danger that this regulation has a negative impact in innovation, especially in the AI field within Europe. And this is also why France and Germany, who both have, maybe I'm sure you heard about it, like France has Mistral, Germany has Aleph Alpha, so they have like two global players in the AI space, so they are heavily lobbying to make the regulations not as strict. For me, like my personal belief is there is danger to make this. It depends a bit how it will be actually implemented on national scale, which is not quite decided yet. But there is the danger that this makes innovation more difficult within Europe.
Yes, makes sense. Thank you, Matthias, for asking as well. There's the last question. And just by the way, if you have more questions, please feel free. We do have a little bit more time that we can stretch to answer all your questions. Okay, so Dan is asking, Microsoft has a Gen AI product called Copilot, which according to them can be customized and used as SaaS. Would they provide some guarantees to meet the EU AI Act compliance, much like previously for GDPR compliance?
So this, I think, is very similar to the previous question with the vendors. So like you are still like very much responsible for your own output. So for example, actually, I did use Copilot to generate some of the charts of the presentation today. But I can, like, if I would, like, in these charts generated something, I don't know, very insulting or very bad for the public, of course, then I'm still liable for this. So in this sense, Microsoft, of course, will have some guarantees around it. In particular, with cybersecurity, I think they have very good guarantees, but in the end, you are responsible in the output that you produce using these Copilot tools.
For sure. At the end, I mean, we have Gen AI, but of course, it's still managed by people, right? So, okay, we don't have any more questions in the chat, but if you do have another one that you're just, cracking your brain on it, this is the moment.
Last one, my slide.
Hi, Sam.
Hi, Gabi. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
So my question is around what you repeatedly said that killer drones are banned based on the EU AI Act, right? So do you imply by that that in the scene of war, that any manufacturers of AI-based killer drones will be heavily sanctioned by the EU?
No, actually, there are exemptions for, in particular, military use on state level, but also for some research purposes and so on. Like what I was referring to was in general, but there's a list of exempted fields that are areas that are fully exempted from the EU AI. One of them being military use for our nations.
Okay, thanks.
How convenient. Sorry. All right. Does anybody?
That
sorry.
you're not allowed. That does mean you're not allowed to, like put a stick on your drone and hit people with it. That's not.
All right. Thank you so much for everybody for their questions. It's been a blast. This is the moment if you have any other question or any comment related to what we've been discussing for the past 45 minutes. This is the moment. We love to hear you out and share the common knowledge. So if you have any other question, we do have 15 more minutes that we can use for that. So feel free to do so. Yeah, hi.
May I just ask a very, very quick question?
Of course. It doesn't have to be quick. You have 15 minutes.
No, I mean, through the presentation, what I didn't get, maybe I missed the very few couple of minutes. If the company is also supporting other companies like Generali, for example, in developing AI solutions, even on small scale. Let's say something which automates intelligently some processes and so on. I just would be interested if there is any possibility to get in touch and understand what are the possibility of being supported in implementation, of course.
Yes, of course. In general, there's just slightly different requirements if you're like helping a company to build the system or if you're the end user. But of course, like we as a company try to support every player in this life cycle.
Okay, thank you.
And by the way, later on we can share Calvin Risk's also their contacts. So if you have further questions that would you like to contact them again, please feel free to do so. We will send an email with all that, especially because we're going to share this recording later on social media, so you can all have their contacts as well. I think this is it for this really insightful Insurtech breakfast. Thank you everybody for joining. But before you go, we do have a little tradition here at the Insurtech breakfast to take a kind of like a selfie for all the participants, so we can share it later on. So if you feel like it, you want to turn on your cameras for this quick snapshot of the group, would be lovely. Let me just see. Okay, so maybe we can see everybody who has joined today. All right. Okay, I see familiar faces already. Good. Okay, so I'm just gonna go. Let's big smiles. And 1, 2, and 3. Thank you so much. All right, guys, thank you for joining us in this Insurtech breakfast. Remember that this is a platform for to open up really interesting conversations and trendy topics. So we will see you next time. And you can follow us at HITS House of Insurtech on LinkedIn to know more about all the events that we are planning as well. So have a great Friday. Enjoy the day. It's super nice outside here in Zurich, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Gabby.
much.
Thank you, Syang.